My name is Eugena Oh, and I was born and raised in New York, but when I was really young, we moved to Long Island, and my parents are still there. So life was great. I mean, I really think that my parents went above and beyond to provide my brother and me a really idyllic childhood. We had the perfect little house, we had our own bedrooms, we had a pretty diverse community. Pretty typical for, I think, a lot of communities on Long Island. It was very heavily Jewish and very heavily Asian. And that was kind of the reality that I grew up in. For about 10 years, my grandparents, both my grandmother and grandfather, moved in, and they lived with us and they helped to raise us from about, for me, age 3 to 13. So they were really crutch in helping to provide, I guess, support and childcare to my parents. And my parents both worked. My mom was a nurse, my dad was a computer programmer, and my grandparents really, really spoiled us. My grandfather is a trained professional chef, so he really, really spoiled us in terms of creating these amazing meals for us. He would ask us what we wanted to eat for dinner and then make it for us, which I think is particularly spoiling for children. So it was wonderful. When I was younger, I didn't understand, again, how lucky I was to have them around. And I think at times I was a little bit annoyed that they seemed to favor my brother over me, which was, I think, not too surprising, but very, very subtle in some ways as well. He was also younger, so he's the baby of the family, and I think that fed into it as well. But to this day, I have a really close relationship with my grandmother. You know, there was a period of time where they moved back to Busan, where they're from, but then when my grandfather passed away in 2007, my grandmother moved back in with us. So she was really around for my very formative years, and later on, when I was out of college and working and she moved back in with us, I think I've been able to more fully appreciate this time with her. What I love about my grandmother and what I appreciate about her, one of many things, is that she is just eminently adaptable. You know, she's lived in so many different time periods, and the advances that this world has seen in her 92 years are unfathomable to me, really. She grew up for 15 years, from the ages of 8 to 23. She lived in Fukuoka in Japan, which is actually where she met and married my grandfather and had her first 3 children. At the end of occupation, at the end of World War II, they were able to safely come back to Busan, and then they lived through the Civil War. So she just has been through a lot, seen a lot, and I feel like I've been able to get a lot of her wisdom and experiences in just learning about that time period. And she has been able to be flexible and adapt to it all. And I think one of the biggest adaptations I've seen in her is actually in just supporting me as a Korean woman in the United States and telling me to do things that I think she wished she could have done. But you know, she's very proud of all of the education I received, and she wasn't allowed to go to school past 8th grade. She's very proud of the fact that I have a job that I love and a career that I love, and that I earn my own money, and I have traveled around the world, and that I just am able to be more independent than she was ever given the opportunity to be. And she's very encouraging of me in that regard, and she gives me good advice in that regard. So it's very impressive to me. I am currently an executive at a nonprofit organization. It's an education-focused organization called the I Have a Dream Foundation, and we work with children who are living in poverty, and we help them get to and through college. So we're really trying to break the intergenerational cycle of poverty using education, and specifically higher education, as the main lever. And I actually attended law school and came back and practiced law for a little while, but then came back to the nonprofit sector eventually. And I've been here and within the I Have a Dream Foundation for a little over 4 years now. I decided to leave the practice of law because I specifically was pursuing a role within the I Have a Dream Foundation. However, it really fell into my longer term plan to come back to public service work in some way, shape, or form. So after I graduated from law school, my first job was at a typical larger law firm, but my 3, 5, 7-year plan was always to try and translate my legal practice into public service. I think that my plan was always to come back to public service because I've always been a very mission-driven person, and I wanted to work for a mission-driven organization. There's been a little bit of confusion and some misperception along the way, you know. Definitely the term not-for-profit made my mom think that I would never get paid for anything that I did. So I just had to clarify that, you know, that doesn't mean that the employees don't profit or don't make a wage. It just has to do with kind of the goals of the organization. My parents have always been really supportive of me, and I feel very, very grateful for that. So I think I don't have a typical public service switchover story, and I don't have typical parents, you know. They've always been very open about the fact that one of the main reasons they came to the United States is because they did not support the government that was in Korea during the time, and they were protesting, and they were hit with gas bombs and all this ridiculous stuff that happens to student activists and student protesters. So I think they see themselves in me in some of the decisions that I've made as a student and now as an adult. But overall, you know, my parents have been extremely supportive. They've always just been very invested and concerned with my happiness. And you know, once I got all the really good grades and got into the schools that they thought were acceptable, and you know, got the degrees that they thought were acceptable, they've just wanted me to be happy. So, you know, I think they saw that while I was working at a law firm, I was truly probably the unhappiest I've ever been. And not only that, but the work was really demanding. And I barely got to see them because I was just always working. So I think that also helped kind of smooth the pathway for me. My father, you know, has always been extremely supportive of me no matter what, almost blindly, maybe. And my mom, you know, I think because I'm very close with my parents, you know, I've told her and I've brought them along in my thinking, you know, from college till today. So I don't think they were surprised at all when I told them that I was leaving the practice of corporate law. I am Eugena Oh, and this is my Korean American story.